Is wild camping in Scotland illegal? First, a bit of background. Now, as you probably know, over the last few years, Scotland has had lots of news coverage about motorhomes and campervans, the vast numbers of them, and sadly, some of the destruction and waste and littering that some inconsiderate people have done. But let's go back a little bit further than that and let's find out where this tension has come from. So back in 2015, the Scottish Tourist Board released this spectacular driving route designed to encourage people to come to Scotland and see some of the more remote places that perhaps people weren't talking about in the media. They wanted to encourage tourism, they wanted to encourage money being spent in the more local communities, and that is the NC 500, and it has worked incredibly well. You know, they've got websites about it, they've got stickers been sold in all of the shops, but I've driven the NC 500, and then people are obviously going back, telling their friends and sharing it on social media, so the popularity has grown. Indeed, it was so successful that in 2017 they released the North East 250, and in 2019 they released the Southwest Coastal 300. Both, again, beautiful driving routes designed to encourage tourism and people to visit Scotland on driving holidays. So far so good, everybody's happy, people have got nice routes to go, money's coming into the country, it's all good. And then the pandemic hits. And everybody who was locked down in Great Britain couldn't travel abroad like they usually do, so started looking for other places to visit when we were allowed to travel again. And the remote places in Scotland, far away from people and cities and all the danger that the pandemic still had at that time, was really appealing. So people flooded to Scotland in their droves. Far more than the Scottish Tourist Board could ever reasonably anticipate, and that wasn't their fault. Nobody could anticipate what happened in the pandemic, but so many people came to visit this area that it just couldn't cope. There weren't the services, there still aren't the services or the facilities for all of these visitors, and they're not all in motorhomes and campervans. There are cars and caravans and motorcycles, just way more visitors than they ever anticipated would come to do these routes. So all in all, it's a complete mess. You've got far too many vehicles of all types crowding up the roads and the infrastructure that just weren't designed for this many people. And it has led to two different sides of the story. On one side, you've got the locals, the people who live and work there, who are now faced with thousands, and we are literally talking thousands of vehicles crowding up their roads, making it tough for them to get to work or school or the hospital or wherever they need to get to quickly. Because the problem, especially when you're just looking at motorhomes and campervans, is that they're larger vehicles and they do clog up the roads because many of these are single track lanes with passing places. You've then got a lot of either foreign visitors who don't know that they won't be able to tour like they do in Europe, so they won't be able to find things like airs and stuff very easily, and they're not used to booking up campsites so far in advance. But then you've also got people who are brand new to motorhoming and campervanning, who hire a van for the first time and think, oh, we'll go to Scotland because they speak the same language, it'll be a nice way to learn the ropes and see if motorhoming is for us. But then also those people don't know the right way to behave with their van. They don't know how to deal with their waste properly. They don't know how to deal with their water properly. And they have sort of heard bits in forums or Facebook groups, or just assume that they can do things that they really can't. Now, of course, there are some idiots. There are people who are dirty and disgusting and don't care about the places that they're visiting, don't care about damaging the environment, don't care about leaving no trace, and don't care enough to watch this video. Now, I often get a lot of stick for talking about wild parking and using the term wild camping, because it does in Scotland, as we will find out shortly, it doesn't apply to motorised vehicles. But here's the thing, I would much rather people who want to know better can find videos like this, who can learn how to be responsible with their vans, with their waste, with their water, and try not to damage and add to the issues that fragile places like the NC 500, like Portugal, have been having in terms of wild parking, wild camping with your van, whatever you want to call it. So what are the facts? Firstly, yes, wild camping is legal in Scotland. However, wild camping does not apply to any motorised vehicle. If you are going off in your vehicle and using your vehicle to stay in for habitation or whatever, that's not wild camping under the law in Scotland. This means that you've got no legal right to take your vehicle off road, to stay on private land, and also you've got no right to ignore any bylaws or local laws which prohibit parking on common or open access land. Now, back in May 2022, there was a change to the wording in the Police Crimes and Sentencing Act, which state that you are breaking the law if you do not move on when you are asked to do so. However, most of the Police Crime and Sentencing Act, including that bit, only applies in England and Wales. The Scottish decided that they weren't going to adopt it. I did an entire video about this, which I will link to at the end of this video so that you can better understand the law in England and Wales. Now, it's wonderful for people to say, stay in a campsite, but the fact is there just aren't enough spaces in the campsite, either because they're fully booked way in advance or because they shut throughout the winter or less busy periods. And often these campsites won't allow people in motorhomes or campervans to dispose of their waste responsibly. So even if they're full and people can't pay for a night, they're not allowing them to use their facilities to empty out their toilets and their grey waste. The trouble is that most motorhomes and campervanners do not realise that they're going to have this issue until they're already up there, leaving people with absolutely nowhere to go. Once you realise that you can't get spots in the campsites or that the campsites are shut, it's too late. So what can you do? Well, assuming that you are not going to park up your motorhome or your campervan, then leave your vehicle and go stay with a tent somewhere, which would actually be legal and therefore would be wild camping because you're allowed to park your vehicle and then go off wild camping. But assuming that you're not going to do that, there are two different laws that apply to you. And forgive me while I read my notes whilst I make sure I get these right. So the first is the Road Traffic Act of 1988. And then the second one is the Transport Scotland Act of 2019. The key comes with what you are doing. If you want to get your gear out, want to stay somewhere for a few days, want to have a group of friends around, want to have a fire, anything like that, and it involves a vehicle or a van, you absolutely need to go and stay on a campsite or an approved authorised stopover point. However, you are allowed to park up somewhere for a few hours to promote safe driving, exactly as lorry drivers do. This means that you can come later in the evening, you can stay for a few hours, get some sleep, and then leave early in the morning. Now, you can't park anywhere where you are parking on a pavement, you're blocking a driveway, blocking an access road, parking in a passing place. Please don't do that. And you can't obviously cause any damage, destruction, leave waste, leave litter, any of that stuff. You're literally just parking for the evening. Now, you also can't ignore any local laws, any bylaws, any signs that say no overnight parking, any signs that say you have to pay if you want to stay there longer than 2 hours or whatever. You need to comply with all of those rules, but there are places that you can stay and park overnight. And that is the difference between camping and parking, which is why I now tend to use the term wild parking to make it clearer. So what is my practical advice? Tensions are high in Scotland. We all know that tensions are high in Scotland, rightly or wrongly. They have a certain view now of motorhomers and campervanners and the damage that they are doing to their country. So if you do visit in a motorhome or campervan, I recommend you do one of these things. Firstly, stay on a proper campsite every single night. This can be really difficult to do when you're trying to plan the trip in advance because you don't know how far you're going to go. It doesn't give you any flexibility to stay somewhere if you're enjoying it, or if you feel ill, or if, I know, the weather's bad and you want to stay an extra day to explore something outside when the rain's gone. Anything like that, you don't get that flexibility if you book up a campsite for every single night of your trip. But that is probably the less problematic way of doing this. Number two is stay in an approved stopover point. So they've got schemes called Stay the Night across Scotland, and you can pay to stay there for the evening. And again, don't leave any waste, don't leave any litter, don't cause any damage or disturbances, but you're watching this video, you're not that kind of person anyway. The third thing you can do is take advantage of schemes like Brit Stops and businesses who will allow you to stay in the car park on their premises overnight if you use their services. So places like pubs and restaurants, there are plenty of them all around the UK, and they can be a really good way of travelling. The only problem with routes like the NC500 is because it is such a circular route, you're not sort of zigzagging around, it can be quite difficult to find them where you want them to be. So that's just something to bear in mind, that you might have to go a little bit off the route in order to find places like that. Now, if you'd like to know more about wild parking or staying off-grid with your motorhome or your campervan around the UK and Europe, I'm doing a live webinar on Zoom this week where I'll be sharing all sorts of tips and tricks to get your van set up, how to find good places, how to stay safe and secure, and loads of other things. I'll leave the link for that in the notes on how you can join me live, and you can come and ask all your questions, or indeed if you've missed the live or can't make it, you can watch the replay and how you can get access to that as well. As promised, here is the link to the video that I did about the law changes in England and Wales, so you can better understand that when it comes to staying off grid with your van. Thank you as always for your time, and I will see you on the next video. Take care. Bye.